Hello, dear friends, and welcome to part 6 of this softly spoken read-through of The Story of Art Without Men by the author Katie Hessel, a wonderful book that addresses the imbalance of art history that has often been told exclusively from the male gaze, with the accomplishments and achievements of male artists, and addresses that imbalance with a unique perspective of art history exclusively told through the work of female artists. We start this part with Worlds Beyond Our Realm, Surrealism. Here's a quote. "Of course, the women were important, but it was because they were our muses. They weren't artists," so claimed Roland Penrose, husband of Lee Miller, to legendary feminist Whitney Chadwick during her visit to his home in the 1980s. When Chadwick later asked artist Leonora Carrington for her thoughts on the surrealist muse, she replied, "I thought it was bullshit. I didn't have time to be anyone's muse. I was too busy rebelling against my family and learning to be an artist." Building on the anti-establishment notions of Dada, in the wake of the political crises and traumas of the First World War, the Spanish Civil War, and the fear of encroaching fascism across Europe, the artists, writers, and thinkers of the surrealist movement rejected ideas of conventionality and were drawn to the subconscious. They placed emphasis on the power of dreams and the dislocated imagery found in their fantasies or nightmares, engaging in the brutality of the body, in part influenced by the return of missing-limbed veterans from the front lines. Using new methods of working from automatism, creating without conscious thought, which derived from spiritualism, to collage and photomontage, the surrealists combined pictures of the real world with those in the depths of our minds. Founded by poet André Breton in Paris in 1924, surrealism was initially appealing to women due to its projected ethos of equality and radical and progressive thought. However, this was not entirely borne out in practice, and many women eventually rejected Breton due to his profound misogyny. For him, as he wrote in his 1929 manifesto, the problem of woman was the most marvellous and disturbing problem in all the world. Given his views of women as muses, wonders, enigmas, objects, and femmes enfants, the child woman was young, beautiful, and obedient. It is not surprising that the female surrealists had to carve their own independent path, both through their art and the ways in which they dressed. For male artists, surrealist ideas were built around the sexuality of the female image, with the likes of Max Ernst and Salvador Dali, of course, filling their canvases with violent and brutal images of fragmented or idealized bodies. However, as Carrington's punchy bullshit statement informs us, being seen as a muse was not something these strong-willed women intended to settle for, despite the gatekeepers of art history so often writing it that way. Women's role in surrealism is a powerful, inventive, and fascinating one. They switched up the eroticized portrayal of their own bodies by turning their gaze back onto themselves. They looked to represent liberation and oppression, imagination and transformation, as well as magical and sensual qualities in their work. In their depictions of dreamscapes, landscapes, and frequently claustrophobic architectural interiors, they showed women as strong, dominating, and free. Unlike their male counterparts who largely wore three-piece tweed suits, female surrealists used dress as a means of expression, as if to become walking embodiments of surrealist ideas, featuring themselves of animals, sphinxes, and other mythological creatures. Leonore Fini would even dress up in lion-like headscarves. Centered mostly in Paris during the avant-garde, by 1930, the movement had attracted artists internationally, from runway English debutantes Carrington to small-town American photographers Miller. But although we hear so often about the male contribution to the movement, it was the women working from collage, painting, photography, photomontage, and sculpture who also advanced surrealist thinking and pushed forward techniques in the most radical of ways. One of the leading surrealist figures working in photography and photomontage was Dora Maar. Born Henriette Theodora Markovich to a bourgeois family, Maar was raised between Buenos Aires and Paris. Here she turned to photography after studying the decorative arts and painting, and captured the spirit of the movement through her Gothic-inspired images. This is a wonderful Gothic image. The years lie in wait for you. The suffocating sprawl of the cobweb and the spider in the centre. Lovely. Working both on commissions and on a commercial basis, Ma was one of the first women photographers to co-run a studio in Paris, and thrived in both her artistic and advertisement work, with the 20s and 30s marking an exciting movement for commercial photography thanks to the boom of advertising. Magazine editors and contemporary brands favoured commissioning inventive photographs over hand-drawn illustrations, and it was Ma's distinctive eye and knowledge of surrealist techniques that earned her work from a myriad of health and beauty projects designed to promote the new women. These include Femme Cheveux avec Savon, Women's Hair with Soap, 1934, a shampoo promotion which depicted a highly imaginative and uncanny still of a woman washing her sculpture-like hair, and The Years Lie in Wait for You, a photo montage of her friend, the poet Nouche Eliade, with a spider web superimposed over her face, created as a marketing for an anti-aging cream. Wow, that is quite avant-garde advertising. However, despite Ma's eagerness to promote or project the idea of a modern woman, and many of the other women surrealists' intentions to do this, France between the two world wars was a contradictory environment for women's rights, with the state demanding women return to the home, and it wasn't until 1944 that they were finally granted the right to vote. But like so many of her surrealist contemporaries, she remained unmoved by the establishment, and motivated by her strong leftist beliefs, she ventured to the outskirts of Paris, London, and Barcelona with a handheld camera, very rare for a woman at that time, and captured subjects ranging from pearly queens to butchers and blind street peddlers in images now considered some of the earliest examples of street photography. Ma always saw the extraordinary in the mundane, even though she often infused it with a slightly strange, slightly gothic, uncanny atmosphere. Ma's friend and contemporary Lee Miller also worked on a range of subjects which varied photographic styles. Whether commercial, fashion, or war photography, Miller always caught an image with an otherworldly atmosphere, and contributed to inventing techniques such as solarization, which was exposing undeveloped images to the light to create a mystical silvery effect that would not only push forward the movement of surrealism, but develop the practice of photography in itself. Born Elizabeth Miller in Poughkeepsie, New York, the young, fearless, and highly intelligent Miller grew up being treated as an equal to her two brothers, with whom she was known to be fiercely competitive. However, when her mother became unwell and left her in the care of family and friends at the age of 7, she was raped and contracted gonorrhea. Oh my word. She was told never to speak of the incident. Miller moved to New York in her teens, where she became a successful model, gracing the cover of Vogue after allegedly meeting Condé Nast himself at a road crossing. That is a horrific detail that's just been thrown out there. Apologies, I didn't know that was coming up. Wow, that's terrible. Here's Lee Miller tangerine under a bell jar. A stunningly haunting image. And portrait of space. Al-Bulwayeb near Siwa in Egypt. That's another beautiful otherworldly image. Ambitious and determined, Miller soon abandoned modelling to go behind the camera, travelling to Europe where she assisted and collaborated with Man Ray. She was adept at finding surrealist shapes within the body and rejected the male objectification of women entirely. Having been the muse and object for much of Man Ray's work, in 1933, the year after she'd left for New York, he remade his work, Object to be Destroyed, in 1923, by attaching an image of her eye to a metronome. It was through photography that Miller documented the suffocating reality of what it was like to be a woman in the 1930s, as seen in the image we just saw of her friend Tanya Ram's head suspended in a bell jar, silent and trophy-like. A successful commercial photographer, Miller returned to New York in 1932, at the height of the Great Depression, and opened up a photographic studio under the androgynous name of Lee. Life then took her to Egypt, where, with her surrealist lens, she photographed expansive, empty desert scenes glimpsed through a ripped mesh sheath, as seen in Portrait of Space. But it was in England that she settled, on the outbreak of global conflict, becoming a war correspondent for Vogue. Her photographs are records of women's contributions to the war effort, but also of the grief-stricken mothers affected by loss. Reporting from Dachau and Buchenwald concentration camps, Miller famously captured the horrors experienced by so many, which we'll see later. Influenced by Dada artists, the surrealists favoured working with found objects that they transformed from the ordinary to the extraordinary, using simple materials, or even just placing two found objects together in an act of assemblage, similar to the way that photographers and collagists would merge multiple images, or painters did with multiple subjects. Those working with objects believed in the power of reshaping the mundane in unexpected and exciting ways. So designed to trigger the senses, the fur-lined teacup created by Merit Oppenheim is one of the most absurd, jarring, and quintessential objects of the surrealist movement. Titled Object, 1936, when exhibited at the Surrealist exhibition in New York in the same year, it caused an uproar among viewers. It continues to divide opinion to this day. I think that was absolutely great. A fur-lined teacup. How surreal. How absurd. One of the most foremost British artists working in a surrealist style, Eileen Agar, was hailed for her vibrant sculptures made up of objects found in or beside the sea. And she was interested in the magic created when two individual objects are placed beside each other, and their juxtaposed histories, playing with the familiarity of objects, she fused them as one, as if piecing together a collage. Born in Buenos Aires, Agar moved to the UK at the age of 6 and grew up in an extravagant yet conservative household with a mother known to be a lover of great hats, whose only wish was for her daughter to marry respectably. With altogether different thoughts in mind, Agar ran away to the Slade School of Art in the early 20s, destroyed all her work prior to 26, and soon after fled to Paris, where she thrived. Here she mixed with the Cubists who taught her about form, and the Surrealists who introduced her to the idea of tapping into her subconscious mind. Returning to London in 1930, she painted 3 symbols, previously titled The Flying Pillar, combining subjects ranging from, in her words, Greek culture to industrial modernity, to reflect the rapidly developing world around her, and to evoke the idea of being a woman between the patriarchal pillars. Agar used assemblage to devise new purpose and personalities within an object and challenge gender conventions. Upon seeing a plain marble bust of her partner, Joseph Bard, Agar declared it caught nothing whatsoever of his character and became determined to create a piece that did. The glittering, and when witnessed in the flesh, stocky and heavy, Angel of Anarchy is festooned with fabric, silks, seashells, feathers, and diamante stones, evoking both Bard's character and his significance in Agar's life as lover and muse. In acknowledgement of the great political and social upheaval taking place in Britain, Agar, who like Bard was an anti-fascist and a pacifist, blindfolded the head in silk fabric as if to symbolize her apprehensions about the future. Surrealism continued to thrive in Britain, leading the way were Edith Remington, Marian Adams, Emmy Bridgewater, Kay Sage, and Stella Sneed, who each incorporated themes of nature and the significance of the landscape, perhaps to offer an imagined existence away from the suppressing patriarchal constructs. In their paintings, the surrealist women were intrigued by the slippage between different gender roles and the act of transformation. They painted themselves and each other in myriad guises, as well as using the medium to open up their psyches and inner worlds. With the outbreak of war in 1939, many of the women artists based in Paris went on to exhibit their work worldwide and continued their practice in Europe, Mexico, and the Americas. Populating her paintings with commanding figures of women in their form as sphinxes, eroticized self-portraits with billowing hair, and emasculated males reminiscent of Velázquez's The Rokeby Venus, Leonore Finney incorporated the most fantastical otherworldly realities in her tightly rendered surfaces. Born in Buenos Aires but raised in Trieste in northern Italy, after a young mother escaped her domineering Catholic father, Fini, a self-taught artist, adopted a painting style reminiscent of the Renaissance of trauma. Sorry, that's not the Renaissance of trauma. Adopted a painting style reminiscent of the Renaissance works she'd witnessed in her youth, and her childhood had been full of trauma. That was a big slip, wasn't it? So she and her mother were often on the run from her father, who refused to grant his wife a divorce and was determined to take his daughter back to Argentina. So to foil her father's kidnapping attempts, Finny dressed as a boy for many years. During her adolescence, Finny suffered from rheumatic conjunctivitis that required her to have both eyes bandaged for months, which allegedly allowed her to look deep into her imagination. Arriving in Paris in the early 30s, Finny was adored by many. Chadwick described her as tall and striking, with jet black hair and piercing eyes. Possessed a strange combination of feline grace and Amazonian power. Rejecting Breton's manifesto and his misogynistic views, it was through paint that she depicted herself and her friends, Merritt Oppenheim and Leonora Carrington, as commanding women in charge of their own lives. Although at first glance her self-portrait with Scorpion feels traditional, look closer and exudes sexuality, seductiveness, and dominance. Portraying herself in a proto-punk, proto-feminist ripped dress, she holds a silver glove, a typically erotic symbol, hiding a scorpion, alluding to sexual passion or power within. She turns 3/4 towards us, head on, with self-assurance and determination. And influenced by the onset of the Spanish Civil War and the likelihood of another war, Finny also turned to representation of the Sphinx as a warrior symbol of knowledge and beauty, with the power to overcome this distressing time. The exploration of gender roles was hugely important in Finny's work, as it was for the surrealists as a whole. And as if we were stumbling on a private scene, her self-portrait with Nico Papatikis, La Alcove, made at a time when she had fled Paris for Rome, presents a woman governing a highly idealized, eroticized, effeminate male body, with his hands coquettishly removing the bed sheets. We have that here. And here we have with her lion headdress. She looks amazing. Continuing to paint until her death in 96, she created the costumes for Federico Fellini's 8 Hearts in 1963 and made ball gowns for the likes of Brigitte Bardot in the 50s. She applied her surrealist philosophy in every art form she tackled. Similarly interested in magic, alchemy, and experimenting with gender roles, Leonora Carrington fled her debutante lifestyle in Lancashire to join the surrealists in Paris. And like so many women of the movement who were from families steeped in tradition, Carrington was attracted to surrealism for its anti-establishment values. However, after entering into a relationship with the much older artist Max Ernst, it was through painting that she portrayed her emotional and artistic oppression. In Portrait of Max Ernst, she presents him as almost feline, dressed in a billowing crimson fur coat and looming ominously in an icy landscape. A winter horse, representing Carrington, appears twice. One stands behind him, frozen in the distance, whereas another, in a similar style to Lee Miller's photograph of Tanya Ram under a bell, is strapped in a green glass lantern, as if symbolizing his inescapable, dominating control. And when the war broke out, and with no family to turn to, Carrington fled to Mexico City, a place that was appealing to artists because of its Aztec and Mayan history. It was here that she developed further as an artist and remained for the rest of her life with close friends and fellow artists Remedios Varo, a Spanish painter known for her meticulously rendered alchemic and scientific paintings, photographer Cathy Horner, who would capture surrealist black and white images of Carrington, and poet and painter Alice Rayon, who referenced Mexican culture, myths and landscapes in her mystical paintings. Working well into the 2000s, Carrington often harked back to the constraints of her British childhood, and through works such as Green Tea, of 1942, which showed mummified figures in a luscious, verdant English landscape, and Grandma Moorhead's aromatic kitchen in 1975, which fused Mexican food with the memory of her grandmother's English stove. Here's that painting of Max Ernst by Leonora Carrington. Wonderful. The Mexican surrealist art scene was already well established thanks to the legendary painter Frida Kahlo and the artists participating in the cultural renaissance of post-revolution Mexico City. Another notable artist of the period was the self-taught Maria Izquierdo, who produced vivid, icon-like portraits of women in traditional Mexican dress. Here is the work of Frida Kahlo of Henry Ford Hospital, 1932. Very interesting, isn't it? It's images of coming out of the womb. We've got flowers, the cervix, snail, the fetus, where the fetus is within the body, like some hospital tools and equipment. A child of the revolution, she would lie about being born in 1910 as opposed to 1907 to coincide with Mexico's revolution. Frida Kahlo was passionately political and initially dreamed of becoming a doctor. However, following an early life full of trauma, she contracted polio at the age of 6, which left her with a withered leg, and at 17 suffered horrific injuries when she was involved in a bus crash. Her dreams started to change. She was encouraged to paint when she was recovering from the accident and bedbound. She painted what she had access to, her friends, family, sisters, and also her greatest subject, herself. Kahlo embraced and scrutinized her own image in a way that had never been done before. Her output remains one of the most fascinating expressions of self in art history. Vulnerable, crippled, heartbroken, strong, assertive, full of life and in love, Kahlo portrayed herself going through every emotion and in every guise. She was intrigued by the body's ability to transform itself, a subject that also came up in the work of Carrington, and used paintings to explore her struggles with pregnancy and miscarriages in images that are brutal yet truthful. In that painting of Henry Ford Hospital that we just saw, we witness a harrowing surrealist self-portrait of her experience of abortion and of being separated from her fetus, lying on an oversized hospital bed, her belly swollen and her spindled backside in a pool of blood. Tears pour from her eyes as she clutches a string-like umbilical cord that links her to the fetus, as well to a snail, pelvic bone, a machine, flower, and a cast. In this work, she presents the disturbing reality of what it was like to be a woman, affirming the vulnerability of the self in ways that remain radical today. Not only was North America free of the misogynistic demands of the male surrealists, but it was a place that was home to an inherently expansive surrealist landscape, flat prairies and desert plains, motifs that would appear in the paintings of Dorothea Tanning and Chicago-based Gertrude Abercrombie. Captivated by what she described as surrealism's limitless expanse of possibility, the Illinois-born Tanning spent her childhood, where she said nothing happens but the wallpaper, escaping into the worlds of Gothic novels and other literature. She first encountered surrealism at the Fantastic Art Dada Surrealism exhibition in 1936 at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and 3 years later travelled to Paris in an attempt to meet the artists whose work she'd seen. And getting there, she discovered that many had fled the city at the outbreak of war and would soon do the same and return home. And in time, numerous European artists crossed the Atlantic, mainly settling in New York City, which became home to a haven of cultural refugees. Determined to formulate her own surrealist imagery and style, Tanning marked her birth into the movement with a self-portrait. In Birthday, she stands bare-breasted, wearing a fantastical costume, a glittering mauve and silver Elizabethan-like blouse, and a skirt formed with tiny, formless bodies in front of a suite of open doors that extend as far back as we can see, perhaps a route to our most secret desires. The symbolism of the doors remains unknown. Famously evasive about her intentions, Tanning once said, "Don't ask me to explain my paintings." drawn to mystery and the power of dreams. Upon moving to Sedona, Arizona, in her words, the landscape of wild fantasy, Tanning painted Eine kleine Nachtmusik in 1943, a disturbing surrealist nightmare picturing what looks like two young girls ominously standing in an empty hotel corridor, their hair erupting like flames as they are chased by or are chasing a giant sunflower. Experimenting further, Tanning later transformed elements from her paintings into soft sculptures in her installation Hotel du Pavillon Chambre, featuring stuffed, awkwardly shaped figures climbing on walls. As viewers of her work, we are unsure as to what constitutes life or reality, and through her art, Tanning makes us see the world differently. Working independently from the surrealist group, Gertrude Abercrombie spent most of her life immersed in the Chicago jazz scene. With a penchant for cats, crescent and full moons, sinister desert-like landscapes that feature as paintings in bleak, cold interiors, as seen in Countess Nerona No. 3, stairs that led to nowhere, or a series of rhythmically coloured doors as seen in Doors 4. Abercrombie formed a unique style and presented her sometimes postage stamp-sized paintings in flamboyant frames. Through images of transformation, oppression, and liberation, surrealism as a movement and a philosophy, which is still in development today, allowed women artists the possibility of challenging the establishment and fashioning their ideas, artworks and objects into something entirely new. Whereas some of these women are now more famous than others, in recent years exhibitions on surrealism that feature only women artists have toured the world, in addition to major retrospectives by Tanning, Marr, Agar, and Miller. That brings us up to our next part on modernism in the Americas. A good point, I think, to place a pin in where we are in this read-through so far. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to having you join me next time. And until then, goodbye.